Hi again. F.F. Bruce, the Canon of Scripture. In the last segment, he's been discussing the Catholic response and the Catholic consensus about what New Testament documents should be approved, what were to be authoritative. It hadn't been sealed yet, but the heresies such as the Marcionites and the Valentinians caused the church to think very deeply about what were the limits of the New Testament canon. Now, Bruce is discussing the role of the book of Acts in the Catholic consensus about the nature of New Testament documents. Bruce says, in this regard, Acts played a crucial part. It is indeed the hinge of the New Testament collection, giving it its organic structure. It is a truly Catholic work, the keystone of a truly Catholic canon. Peter, Paul, and James are all honored in it, together with such leaders of the Hellenistic advance as Stephen and Philip. Such a work could not have been countenanced by those who rejected all strands of apostolic Christianity but one, such as Marcion, who would only approve Paul and him in a truncated form, and one gospel, Luke. Bruce goes on, but it was admirably suited to the purpose of Catholic churchmen, that is, the book of Acts, and it's embracing all of the apostles, despite their differences. Bruce goes on, the same Catholic spirit is evident in the fourfold gospel. To begin with, each gospel was doubtless the gospel in the communities in which it circulated, but they were all greatly enriched when, to the witness of their own gospel, there was added the witness of the others. Some scrupulous readers might feel that the inconsistencies, and he's got a word I'm not familiar with, inconsinities of the four, that is the four Gospels, called for harmonizing activity. But others rejoiced in the plurality of testimony that was now available, recognizing with the compiler of the Muratorian List, an outstanding document of the Catholic response, that the variation among the four writings makes no difference to the faith of believers, since in all of them everything has been declared by one primary spirit. If only one of the four had received canonical status, if Marcion's precedent, for example, had been generally followed, the path of the gospel critic might have been smoother, but we should all have been gravely impoverished. The four were not originally composed in order that readers might have a fourfold perspective on the ministry of Jesus, but in the event their collocation has provided just that is a fourfold view or perspective. It's noteworthy, too, that Matthew's contribution, which became preeminently the Church's gospel and stood at the head of the fourfold collection, is self-evidently a Catholic work. Even if the other synoptic gospels were not available for comparison with it, it would be possible to discern a variety of strands in its record of Jesus' teaching. The particularist strand, that is, go nowhere among the Gentiles, and the more comprehensive strand, many will come from east and west, transcended in the post-resurrection commission to make disciples of all nations. The fact that this Catholic work stands at the head of the New Testament points to the Catholicity of the canon as a whole, and not only of the gospel collection. In the apostolic generation, separate spheres of public ministries were carefully demarcated, as is amply attested from Paul's letters. And he references here Galatians 2 and Romans 15:20. Remember where Paul and Peter and James separate their various works, the strands of the early gospel preaching. But in the post-apostolic age, the necessity of recognizing such separate spheres disappeared, while sectarian tendencies manifested themselves. The church as a whole paid heed to Paul's exhortation to recognize that all the apostles and teachers whom the Lord had sent, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, belonged to them all. That's 1 Corinthians 3 verse 22. It would be difficult to envisage in the apostolic age one and the same church claiming Peter and Paul together as joint founders. It was historically ludicrous for Dionysius, bishop of Corinth, around 170 AD, to make this claim for his own church. Paul might have turned in his grave at the thought of Peter sharing in what was so totally his own foundation. But there was a certain theological fitness in the claim, insofar as it expressed a resolve to appropriate the entire apostolic heritage. It is this resolve that is expressed in the New Testament canon, where every document that could reasonably be claimed as apostolic in origin and teaching found its place in due course. So I found that when I first read this book some years ago, I found that a very challenging thought, that Acts and Matthew both represent Catholic Christianity coming out of the first century, and that tendency to embrace all of the apostles was somehow not something that we could take for granted. When you look at the heresies, particularly Marcion, where there's a preference expressed for one of the apostles, and then you reserve yourself the right to edit his works, whether it be Luke or Paul. So I'll put in a link to Acts and the authority of the apostles. What qualified the 12 to be witnesses? And of course that's taking on the name and branding of Jehovah's Witnesses.